savings. It came from somewhere. If you look right now, even as we speak from the statistics, in Africa, research has proven that the Kenyan workforce, when they retire, they're the poorest compared to other countries. So what do we do as we save our tomorrow for today? Without further ado, I would like to welcome the Zamara team led by their group my network again. Sorry, today, please take advantage, ask all the questions you wanted to ask as HR professionals, as people who manage people, as people who want to ensure that everyone is capable by the time they retire from work, everyone is capable for saving for their future, and everyone is capable for contributing to the welfare of their employees. Very important. Mr. Sandeep, the group CEO, karibu sana, and thank you so much to all our members. I know these numbers will go up. I know there'll be those ones who will be following us live. We're live on YouTube. We've shared the link, and I can see from Mandera to Wajir to Nairobi to Malaba, we are all here. Thank you so much, and over to you, Irene, as you welcome our guests for today, the sponsors of this Zoom for the next 2 hours.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Kuresha. We appreciate your input and also your guidance and leadership in making such partnerships possible. So Raymond and James, all from Zamara, and George, we thank you all for the support. And at this point, let us hand over to Mr. Sandeep and Adil, who will be supporting us with the Q&A and also the chat. So please feel free to share your questions even as we proceed with the presentation. Karibu.
Thank you very much, Irene and Madam Director. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well, and you can also see the presentation on your screens, wherever you're joining from.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, excellent. So first of all, let me say how very absolutely honored and delighted we are to have this opportunity to present to the distinguished members of the IHRM. And as you said, Irene and Madam Kuresha, that you are the people who look after the people. You are the bedrock of most organizations. You create the environment, the culture, and the structures within which people and organizations can thrive. And I would say that at Zamara, without the support of our Chief People and Culture Officer, I don't know, I'd be completely lost. So first of all, let me acknowledge and salute the very important role that you play within organizations in Kenya. And turning to the subject of the day, the new legislation, the National Social Security Fund Act of 2013, let me say how especially delighted we are to have this forum with HR practitioners, because how you look at this legislation, how you communicate it, how you present it, how you take it to your decision makers will make all the difference between whether you have an HR crisis or whether you can really use the opportunity to create a good benefits package, especially in terms of retirement benefits for your staff. It's now exactly 3 weeks, ladies and gentlemen, since the Court of Appeal reinstated the Act. As you're all aware, the Act was enacted in 2013, but has been lingering in court for all these years, and it was only 3 weeks ago. And I know that as HR practitioners, this has been weighing very heavily on all of you. And when I read the social media, the contributions there, there's a feeling that this is a draconian act. It is very complicated. It is yet another tax on overtaxed employers and Kenyans, and it is coming at probably the worst time. And yes, there is concern, there is anxiety, there is even apprehension, and to some extent, even suspicion as to why this is being done. And this is natural when you have a piece of legislation like this coming in. But where I sit, and in my very humble view, I want to suggest that the purpose of this act is actually very noble. This is a very important piece of legislation for our country. This is a piece of legislation that intends or seeks to improve the future financial well-being of our people. This is a piece of legislation that seeks to fortify our citizens against the economic shocks that they face time to time in their lives. This is a piece of legislation which, if properly implemented, will have huge benefits to our economy in terms of the long-term savings that will be generated through implementation of the Act. And I want to humbly say again that this is a piece of legislation that I believe is about safeguarding the future of our society. And that is why I'm on record as saying the National Social Security Fund Act of 2013 is in our national interest as a country. And I believe that as HR practitioners, you can take the leadership on this. Very important to understand what the legislation is, what it entails, what it provides, what these increased contributions that everybody is so concerned about mean, what the benefits are, and how you can best structure your own existing arrangements, your benefit structures, so that you can better align to meet the needs of the staff and the people that you look after. So, in terms of our presentation today, as the Madam Director said, it's useful to understand the background to this act. I mean, I don't believe the policymakers in our country just woke up one day and they said they wanted to tax Kenyans, or they wanted NSSF to become big, or they wanted to have more money within the NSSF. There were important policy rationales for this act, and we will spend a few moments to go through them. I will then run through the act in a little bit of detail, talk about the contributions and the benefits, as well as some of the as well as talk about contracting out from the NSSF and how you may do it should you wish to. My colleague will take us through some illustrations in terms of numbers, what this means, and we'll finish with some suggested next steps for employers and for your existing retirement plans, if you have them. As Irene said, you can put your questions on the Q&A, and my colleague Adil will very ably respond to them. And you can see that I have the gray hair and Adil has the gray beard. So collectively, we have a lot of wisdom, hopefully, that we can impart today. So let's go to the background to this act. The NSSF is as old as our country. Okay, so it was established in 1965. It's 57 years old. It was established as a provident fund. A lot of people feel that the NSSF gives you pension benefits. Actually, all the NSSF does is when people retire, it just gives a one-off lump sum payment. Now, when the contributions were initially set in 1965, they were actually set at a sensible level. And few people know this, that the rate of contribution in the NSSF and when the fund was established in 1965 was actually 10% of pay, 5% by employees and 5% by employers. However, there has been a monetary ceiling on those contributions. And this monetary ceiling has only been adjusted twice in the last 57 years. So it started off at 40 shillings. It increased to 80 shillings in the year 1978. And it was increased to 200 shillings in the year 2001. So there have only been 2 increases to this rate. Now, the reform of the NSSF has been firmly on the national agenda for many, many years. In fact, every government policy paper that you look at, every party manifesto that you look at has talked about reforming the NSSF, converting it into a national pension plan with an appropriate level of contributions. We also have our constitution, which is not so new anymore. It was promulgated in 2010, but Article 43 of our constitution states that every Kenyan has the right to social security, and pensions is one part of social security. And it's important for our policymakers and the government to put in place the framework to enable this to happen. So this new act is underpinned by policy objectives that I'll talk about in a bit more detail. It was enacted, as many of you will know, in December 2013. It was supposed to have taken effect from January 2014, although some of the sections were delayed to May 2014. But almost immediately, its implementation was challenged in court And the legislation has been in court since 2014. As you will all be aware, the Court of Appeal reinstated the legislation just 3 weeks ago. We are aware that there is a notice of appeal to the Supreme Court that has been filed by the County Pensioners Associations, who are one of the litigants in this matter, for a review of the Court of Appeal's decision. So it's very difficult to tell. But as we speak now, legally, the Act is in force. And it is important that everybody understands what it is and how to comply with it. So let's look at this policy rationale in a bit more detail. So as I said, the NSSF is our national fund, and we have close to 18 million Kenyans in the workforce in Kenya. Only 3 million of those earn a salary. Okay, so only 3 million of those are in the formal sector, about 3.1 million. Most of the people in the informal sector actually have no coverage at all, but most of the 3.1 million people in the formal sector only rely on the NSSF. Those of us who are lucky to have employers to offer pension plans, it's only about 500,000, plus the 500,000 under the public service. These are the teachers, policemen, and the civil servants. So out of the 3.1 million Kenyans in the formal sector, only 1 million or less are actively contributing for their own retirement savings. Okay, so this means that there is a huge gap in the number of people who have access to pension plans. Pensions in Kenya have not been mandatory, as you know. There are over 80,000 employers registered in Kenya, but the number who offer retirement benefits is less than 3,000. So you can see there's a vast number of employers who don't offer benefits, even to salaried employees. The only thing they can rely on is the NSSF. Now, what does the NSSF provide? Contributions since 2001 have only been at 200 shillings. So it's 200 by employees, 200 by employers. That's a total of 400 shillings a month. Okay. Now, you don't need a rocket scientist or an actuary to tell you that if you take 400 shillings a month, you multiply that by 12, you get 4,800, roughly 5,000. Let's say you take a Kenyan who joins the workforce at 25, religiously works for 30 years up till 55. In 30 years' time, he would have contributed 5,000 times 30 years, which that would be 150,000. And let's say you hire the best managers to give you the best returns in the world. You will probably double or triple that money, okay, to about maybe 350, 400,000. Is that enough to send a Kenyan home on? And that is what most people take. The average payout from the NSSF actually is only 60 to 80,000 shillings. I mean, that is less than what the average Kenyan makes in a couple of months. And further, the benefits are only paid as a lump sum. And you and I know that there is a tendency for lump sum benefits to be misused, misapplied, squandered. So we are sending our people home with 70 to 80,000 shillings, the vast majority of them. The few that are lucky to belong to pension plans, again, there are no minimum standards on contributions or benefits. So somebody can, in theory, have a pension plan, but the contribution rates may not be sufficient. The benefits are, again, most of the time paid out as lump sum. So there are poor outcomes that people receive. So the point is, the vast majority of people are excluded from our pension system, but even those who are covered, because of the poor level of contributions and how the benefits are paid, the outcomes are really terrible. Most of the people are only reliant on the NSSF, and I've already explained what NSSF will take us home with. So a lot of people believe this is because our money has been stolen or squandered. But the reality is that NSSF, by its design, has a structural flaw because the rates of contribution are capped by statute. Okay. Now, as a result, as a country, we have a very low savings rate. Our savings rate is only about 10 or 11%. And most of this is actually the pension savings in our country. So the pension sector in Kenya is at about 1.6 trillion shillings, including the NSSF. The NSSF is at about 300 billion shillings. So the private sector, occupational private sector plans are actually bigger than NSSF in terms of size. But the overall point is that our savings rate are very low. Now, creating a system of national savings is one of the best ways of mobilizing long-term savings for a country. Savings that can be channeled into productive areas of development, productive sectors of the economy, to develop our economy, to fuel economic growth, to create those jobs that we desperately need, to develop our capital markets. And as I said earlier, there are very important social and psychological benefits as well, to fortify our citizens against the economic shocks that they face in their lives. And we have just come out of COVID. We saw how our people suffered. If it was so difficult to take care of our people just during the few weeks of the pandemic, how much harder will it be when they permanently drop off the workforce because they're no longer able to work because of old age? So any decent society will want to ensure that its people, that its elderly are taken care of, that should a breadwinner die, the dependents have something to be able to fall back on. And this is why this is a piece of legislation. Like it, hate it, it has important policy objectives which are good for our country. And this is why I sometimes say, I wish they had not called this law the NSSF Act. I wish they had called it something else. Maybe the Kenya National Pensions Act, because the NSSF is simply but playing a role in delivering this. This is a collective effort on the part of the private sector, the NSSF, the government, employers, to improve the welfare of our citizens. So what are the principal objectives of this act then? The first and foremost is to say that those who are already in the formal sector system, for whom the level of contributions is actually a joke, as our president puts it, let us have a sensible level of contributions that will enable a better level of benefit to be provided to people when they retire or become ill or unfortunately pass on. So the first objective is to increase the level of benefits. And again, these contributions, as we will see in a few minutes, are being phased in. So yes, there is a level there is a target level, but hopefully they will be phased in over a period of time. The second thing is, I talked about the benefits being paid in the form of a lump sum under the NSSF and most retirement plans in Kenya. And yes, as Kenyans, we love receiving our money upfront. We love taking it as a lump sum. But the reality is, most people are not able to use this lump sum well. If the intention is to provide retirement security, then it is better provided as a regular income. A lot of people will disagree. A lot of people will say, well, that's for us. These are decisions that we should leave Kenyans to make on their own. But when you look at it from a societal point of view, if you have hundreds of thousands and millions of Kenyans without a regular income in their retirement, how are we going to look after them? We are currently a very young population, but in the next 20 years, we will have more than 9 million Kenyans above the age of 60. Currently, less than 3% are taking a pension. What will the situation be like in the next 20 years if we don't do something about this? So the act, one of the other objectives of the act is to ensure that a lot of the benefit is actually paid as a regular income and not as a lump sum. And also there is a wider range and a higher level of benefits that would be provided. The third is there is a voluntary provident fund that is being set up. There is a new provident fund which is intended to cover the informal sector. For the purposes of this presentation, I won't be speaking about that. And very importantly, for those employers who run their own schemes currently and run them well, and indeed for those employers who wish to set up their own schemes, there is the facility under the Act to opt out of making the second tier of contributions to the NSSF. You can make them to any other scheme, okay? And also, there was a lot of concern that the old NSSF in terms of the Provident Fund, could there be some hidden liabilities? Is one of the reasons the government looking to increase contributions because there's a hole in that previous fund? And that is why what the Act says is that the old Provident Fund will be completely closed. Its assets and liabilities will be ring-fenced and will not be mixed with the new. And finally, there have been a lot of concerns about the governance at the NSSF. And what this act does is it tries to put in checks and balances and safeguards as barriers to wrongdoing. And almost everything that you think can go wrong, there has been a safeguard that hopefully that has been put in that hopefully will work. Okay, so I hope this gives you a little bit of context to why this piece of legislation. Incidentally, I should say I'm not the spokesperson for the NSSF. I'm not holding forth for them at all, but I feel it's important that Kenyans understand that there is a rationale to this piece of legislation. After all, this is our country. So let's now turn to the legislation. And hopefully I will address, a lot of the questions that you might have, even as Adil types away frantically responding to them. So the first is, what is the effective date of this act? As I said, it was enacted in 2013. The intention was to have implemented it from 2013, but it has been in court all this time. Now, the legal position is that the Court of Appeal reinstated this act in its judgment of the 3rd of February. This means that the act is effective immediately from that date. And therefore, the provisions of the act, including the provisions on statutory contributions, are effective from the month of February. And this means that February payrolls need to take account of those contributions. Okay, and we'll run through what they are in a bit more detail. Now, as I mentioned, there has been an association that has filed a notice of appeal. It is unclear at this stage whether any stay on its implementation will be granted by the Supreme Court. And therefore, our recommendation and advice to employers is to ensure that the contributions are deducted starting from the month of February. I know that there is a period of time within which you can remit them to the NSSF, and maybe there may be some more guidance before that needs to happen, but the deductions from payroll need to happen in the month of February. Okay. Now, I have a lot of sympathy with the very many employers and stakeholders that I'm engaging with who are saying this has come very suddenly. It's happening in the middle of a financial year. And I see a lot of merit in there being a grace period. And indeed, there is a precedence in 2014 that the 4-month grace period was then given by the then CS. But as we speak now, there has been no guidance or clarification given on this. So for all intents and purposes, the effective date is the 3rd of February, 2023. Okay. The Act establishes 2 funds. Okay. So there is a new pension fund that applies to everybody in the formal sector. Okay. So this is anybody above the age of 18 years in the formal sector not having attained pensionable age, this act applies to. And there is this new provident fund to cover the self-employed and people in the informal sector who wish to make voluntary contributions. As I've already said, the provident fund is closed and ring-fenced. Okay, now it's quite important to understand this, who is covered by the act, because almost everybody would fall within the definition of an employee. So the Act defines an employee as any person who has attained the age of 18 years, who is employed in Kenya under a contract of service. And a contract can be orally or in writing, expressed or implied. Okay, employer means an individual or a corporate who has entered into a contract of service. So if you employ anybody as an individual, again, you are an employer within the definition of the Act, and who you have employed is an employee within the definition of the Act. There are no exemptions that we can see, and so anybody who's ordinarily resident in Kenya, employed even outside of Kenya, but under a contract of service with an employer who resides in Kenya, they are all covered. Okay. Now, very important for a lot of employers is that all casuals also have to be registered. Because of the temporary nature of casual contracts, their contributions need to be computed on a daily rate, which the Cabinet Secretary will specify in regulations. The special contributions that applied under the old Act have been done away with. So it's important to note that an employer includes the government of Kenya, and looking to see how the government will also comply with this Act. And secondly, there are, just in terms of exemptions, the only exemptions are for persons who are entitled to exemptions under any international conventions. We're getting asked a lot of questions by NGOs, are they exempt? No. Anybody who is employed in Kenya under a contract of employment is required to be a member. A person who is not resident in Kenya and is employed here just for less than 3 years and who contributes to a similar system in their home country can be exempted by applying for an exemption. Okay, so, and the other point to make is that everybody who was a member of the previous Provident Fund, which is all of us, automatically become members of the new pension fund. And anybody, as I said, who falls within the provisions of the Employment Act and is below the age of 60 needs to be registered as a member of the NSSF. Okay, so there is a requirement for employers to be registered. So the existing registration for existing employers is okay, but you need to ensure that all your employees are registered. Okay, now let's turn to the contributions under the Act. Okay, so under the Act, there is no, the contributions are not at 200. The contributions are expressed as a percentage of salary, okay, called pensionable earnings in the Act. So pensionable earnings is the lower of your salary and an upper limit called the upper earnings limit in the Act. Okay, so there's something called the UEL in the Act, which is 4 times national average earnings, which is just over 200,000 shillings now. Okay, all right. Now, wages is defined to include all emoluments, excluding emoluments which are fluctuating. So the Act defines earnings as gross earnings, excluding fluctuating emoluments. So things like bonuses, overtime, whatever would probably be excluded, but things like housing allowance, the intention, I understand, is to have it included. However, there is a drafting error in the regulations that were issued. And this, to me, means that contributions for the time being could be based on a basic salary, but this is still subject to clarifications and maybe legal interpretation. Okay, so the contributions are set at 6%, 6%. So it's a total of 12%. And with time, everybody will be contributing the 12%. But these contributions are being phased in. And my colleague Adil will take us through how this phasing in works and the contributions for the first year and what they might appear once the transition period is over. Okay, so total contributions are at 12% of pay. Okay, these contributions are split into 2 buckets. Okay, so the first bucket is called Tier 1. So Tier 1 is contributions based on earnings up to the minimum wage. Okay, and Tier 2 are contributions above that. Okay, Tier 1 contributions have to be paid to the NSSF. Tier 2 contributions also need to be paid to the NSSF as a default, but an employer may elect to opt out. And in that case, the Tier 2 contributions can be made to an employer's own scheme. It could be an occupational scheme that is set up by the employer itself. It could be an umbrella scheme, a multi-employer scheme in which the employer participates, or it could be a personal pension plan. Okay, but in order to opt out, there is a process for that, and the approval of the RBA is needed to opting out. Okay, again, I'm not going to dwell on this for now because my colleague will give us some illustrations, which I hope will make this much, much clearer. Okay, this is how I talked about the contributions being phased in. And one of the reasons the contributions are being phased in is to give employers time to adjust. Okay, and also individuals time to adjust. And this is applicable to those employees who currently do not offer retirement benefits. But for those employees who offer retirement benefits, the impact will be completely cost neutral if they opt out. Okay. All right. Now, how will the benefits under the new Act work? They will operate very similar to like what most pension schemes in the country operate on. Every individual within the new NSSF will have an individual account. And the benefits will be based on the size of the member account. And in pensions jargon, this is called a defined contribution scheme as opposed to a defined benefit scheme, because the benefits are determined on the basis of the amount of money that is put in and the returns that are made on the money. The contributions that are paid are vested immediately in the individual member, and interest will be allocated to the member accounts once a year by the trustees of the NSSF based on the advice of an actuary or another qualified person. So the allocation of interest will not be arbitrary. The NSSF have adopted what we call an interest declaration policy, and they will be guided by that in allocating returns to members. Okay, the Act provides a number of key benefits. So there is an old age pension. So there is an invalidity benefit payable on ill health or disability or permanent disability. There is a survivor's pension paid to the dependents of an employee who becomes deceased. And all of this is paid in the form of a regular pension. Okay. Now, when somebody retires, up to 1/3 of their member account can be taken as cash. The remaining 2/3 has to be taken in the form of a regular pension. And this can be taken in the form of an annuity from an insurance company or by doing a drawdown from an approved drawdown provider. Okay, so there's a choice in how the benefit is taken. It can't be taken as a lump sum. Only 1/3 can be taken as a lump sum. The remaining 2/3 has to be taken as a regular income, but there is a choice that the member exercises either through an insurer or through a drawdown plan, and the individual can choose which insurance company or which drawdown provider. Okay, there is a funeral grant of 10,000 shillings. This is paid for anybody who dies whilst working, but the person should have made at least 6 months of contributions to qualify for it. And there is an emigration benefit which enables anybody who is permanently emigrating from Kenya to be able to take their entire pot of money in cash. Okay, retirement age is 60 years, but individuals have the option of taking the benefits at or after 50 if they've stopped working. Another very important thing to note is that future contributions under the Act will be preserved until retirement age. So you see, currently we have a situation in Kenya when somebody exits employment before retirement, they can opt to access up to 50% of the pot of money. Okay, so for the statutory contributions made under the Act, they cannot be accessed until retirement age. Okay, all right. So I hope this is reasonably clear. We have a detailed communique that we will share with you, which sets out the benefits in a bit more detail. And we also have FAQs which help you to understand these benefits. The Act has a provision to say that the board may from time to time recommend to the Cabinet Secretary additional benefits, but we hope again that there will be a proper process to follow for these. Now, let me turn to another very important point, which is that this Act does recognize the role that the occupational private pension schemes play in the country, and therefore there is an option for those employers who wish to take it up to opt out of making the second tier of contributions to the NSSF. The default position is all the mandatory contributions have to go to the NSSF, but those employers who wish to may opt out of the second tier of contributions. They can set up their own scheme. They can make changes to their existing scheme so that it can contract out, or they can participate in a multi-employer plan. Okay, very important to state that this application for opting out is not administered by the NSSF. It is administered by the RBA, the regulator in the country. Just to clarify, tier 1 contributions have to be paid to NSSF. It is only tier 2 contributions that can be opted out of. They still have to be paid. They can be paid to the scheme the employer sets up or participates in. Okay, the Act requires that for an employer to opt out, it needs to write to the RBA, complete an application form together with certain resolutions at least 60 days before. Now, obviously, this creates a problem because this Act is being implemented immediately. How do employers give that 60-day notice? Because they don't have the time. So we have been in discussions with our regulator, and the regulator has indicated that they're in consultation with the NSSF, and there is a possibility that these applications can be filed now, and the RBA will be able to hopefully review them, and if they meet the requirements, approve them as quickly as possible. Okay. All right. So the RBA has verbally indicated to us its support for expediting contracting out for those employers who wished to do so. Now, In order to be able to opt out, there are a number of conditions that need to be met. These conditions are not as complicated as they are met, as they're claimed to be. They're pretty simple. The scheme needs to be registered with the RBA, has to have a valid certificate, needs to be registered with the KRA, and importantly, the scheme needs to be able to identify these tier 2 contributions. At the minimum, the contributions to the scheme have to be the same or higher than those provided under the NSSF Act. Okay. The benefits for the tier 2 portion, they have to be paid in the same form as in the main act, i.e. they have to be paid as a regular income. The future contributions need to be preserved until retirement age. Okay. Now, very important to note and clarify that this does not apply to past contributions. It does not apply to any contributions over and above the statutory contributions. So historic contributions, accumulated funds can be paid in exactly the same way as they currently are. Anything above the tier 2 contributions for the future can be paid in exactly the same way as they are. So if it's a provident fund, they're paid out as a lump sum, you can continue doing that for the non-tier 2 portion of the benefits. If there's any questions there, we'll be happy to clarify them. Okay. Very importantly, this act provides for the contributions, that the statutory contributions to be tax deductible. So the contributions are tax exempt, investment income is tax exempt, and when the benefits are paid, the act provides for the benefits to be paid out fully tax free. Okay. These are the benefits, the statutory benefits, the tier 1 plus the tier 2. Okay. Now there is a bit of a conflict between this and the Income Tax Act, which has limits on tax deductible contributions, and clarifications will be needed from the government and the KRA on this. But the way the act is worded, all these contributions and the benefits are completely tax-free. As with any piece of legislation, there are penalties and sanctions that apply. So if contributions are delayed, there's quite a stiff penalty of 5% every month. Okay, so if, for example, the February contributions are not paid on time, it's a 5% on top that you have to pay as a penalty. There are fines on misrepresentation when making benefit claims, for evasion or over deductions, fines for or not exceeding 100,000 for any offense for which no penalty has been expressly provided. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, there have been efforts made to strengthen the corporate governance of the NSSF and subject it to regulatory oversight by the RBA. So there's a tripartite board comprising the government, the FKE representing employers, and COTU representing workers. And there are independent trustees as well who have time limits and term limits of 3 years, renewable only once. The NSSF is explicitly subject to the regulatory oversight of the RBA, needs to comply with the RBA rules, including the investment regulations. Given the concern around expenses, the NSSF expenses are capped at 2% of assets, reducing to 1.5% in the 6th year. Financial statements have to be published within 6 months. The fund has to be subject to actuarial reviews. I talked about the segregation between the pension and the old provident fund and a requirement to hold regular annual AGMs. Okay, so an effort has been made. Regulations under the Act have already been issued. Okay, so we've taken care of those and when talking through these benefits and the contributions, but they are available for you to review if you wish to see them. Okay. I talked earlier about some areas that need further consideration. This is the conflict between the NSSF Act and the Income Tax Act. We really feel that there are certain categories such as domestic staff, the informal sector, casual staff, where maybe there needs to be a little bit more thought given to it. Treatment of individuals who work with more than one employer, the definition of pensionable earnings, I talked about this earlier. So there are a number of gray areas, and I believe that these hopefully will be clarified as the Act starts to get implemented. Okay, so it is said that there are 3 types of actuaries: those who can count and those who cannot. No prizes for guessing which category I belong to. So I'm going to hand over to Adil now to take us through some numbers. It's said that if an actuary cracks a joke on a Friday, you get it by a Monday. I can't quite see the reaction on the screen. So Adil, over to you.
Thanks, Sandeep. I think, guys, I've never typed so fast in my life. And the question.
Okay, can you hear us
Sorry
now?
about that, guys.
Can you hear us now?
Sorry about that. Can everyone hear us now?
Irene,
Yes,
can you confirm?
okay, they can
Okay,
hear
good,
us.
fantastic.
So I was saying that I've never typed so furiously in my whole life. The questions have really been flowing through, and I've been trying to answer them as fast as I can. I hope that everyone is able to see the answers, and the questions do seem to be slowing down. So I think we've answered as many as we can, and Sandeep also has hopefully clarified a lot. Sandeep, they can't see me, so I think I need your computer.
Do you want to?
Let me just take your computer here. Okay, guys. So I'm now presenting as Sandeep. Okay, so I hope that a lot of your questions have been answered, and there's been a lot more clarity. A lot of the questions I was seeing were about tier 1 and tier 2, and what is the impact, etc., etc. So I've tried to put together some illustrations that I hope will help us get through this. Okay, so first let me explain what I'm trying to show you. Okay, so I've got 3 different examples. The first example is somebody earning 50,000 shillings a month. Okay, and we shall look at somebody earning different salaries. Okay, now this let me see if I can get my laser pointer going. Okay, I think you guys can now see this laser pointer. Oh, I just lost it. Okay, so this column here, the middle column, it shows what's actually going to happen in year 1, which is, remember, there's a 5-year transition period. Okay, so the contributions are going to effectively increase over time. Okay, and the way they're doing that is the upper earnings limit is going to change. Okay, so the middle column shows you the reality of year 1. But the last column on the right, what I've done there is I've said, what if there was no transition? What if that 5-year transition period did not exist? And the reason I'm showing you that is I want to show you how the contributions are going to change over time, okay? So that you understand that, yes, we talk about 1,080, you will have seen in the newspaper and stuff, you'll have seen tier 1, 360, tier 2, 720, total 1080, right? You'd have seen figures like that, but I want you to understand that that is only temporary because that's part of the transition, okay? So let's recap what Sandeep told us about the golden rules for contributions. The contribution rate is 6% of pensionable earnings, okay? And that's 6% by the employee and 6% by the employer, okay? So that's a total of 12%. 12% of pensionable earnings is being saved each month, okay? Now, pensionable earnings is effectively your salary. It's your wages. However, it's subject to a ceiling, and the ceiling is called the upper earnings limit, okay? So that means that you're paying 12% of your earnings up to a certain level of earnings. Once you have earnings above that level, those additional earnings are not subject to contributions, okay? So remember that. That is the holy grail in terms of calculating the total contribution requirement to the NSSF. So in this example here, we have an employee who's earning 50,000 shillings, okay? Now, if you look at the middle column, the upper earnings limit in year 1 is going to be 18,000 shillings. So the first thing we do is we calculate the pensionable earnings, okay, which is this line here, So the upper earnings limit is 18,000. I'm earning 50,000. My pensionable earnings is thus 18,000, okay? 6% of 18,000 is 1,080. So my total required contribution is 1,080 shillings. The next thing we want to do is split this up into tier 1 and tier 2. So remember, tier 1 is pensionable earnings up to the lower earnings limit, okay? The lower earnings limit in the year 1 of transition is 6,000 shillings. So we've got pensionable earnings of 18,000. Tier 1 earnings, which is our pensionable earnings up to the lower earnings limit, is going to be the 6,000. And the earnings above the lower earnings limit, which is 18,000 minus 6,000, is 12,000. Okay, so we've now split up the 18,000 shillings of pensionable earnings. We've split it up into Tier 1 and Tier 2. And then it's again just 6%. So 6% of the Tier 1 earnings is 6% of 360. Which is, 6% of 6,000, which is 360. The Tier 2 contributions is 6% of 12,000, which is 720. And that's where those numbers have been coming from. Okay, so that's year 1 of transition. Currently, we contribute 200 bob, right? So the additional contribution is 880. And remember, I've shown you contributions at 6%. So this is the 880 is the additional amount payable by the employee. If you are sitting here and you want to know what it is for the employer, it is exactly the same. Okay, this illustration is showing you what the impact is for the employee and equivalently what the impact is for the employer. Okay, so that's the middle column. That is year 1, 2023, as it stands today. Okay, now if there was no transition, the upper earnings limit, now I've taken an estimate here, but the upper earnings limit would be closer to 160,000 shillings. You can see that figure here. Because in the long term, after the transition, the upper earnings limit is defined as 4 times the national average earnings. 4 times the national average earnings, okay? So instead of the 18,000, which is temporary, if we assume the national average earnings is around 40,000, then the upper earnings limit at 4 times 40,000 would be 160,000. And what you need to see from this example is that suddenly, if there's no transition, the entire salary of 50K is pensionable. You see the pensionable earnings has now become 50,000 because the earnings is below the upper earnings limit. So the entire salary for this member is subject to NSSF contributions. So now we take 6% of 50K and we get 3,000 shillings. So now the contribution would be 3,000, not 1,080. Okay, so over time, a member in this scenario is going to move from contributing 1,080 towards contributing 6% of their full salary. Okay, and I think one important point to realize is that the upper earnings limit is defined as 4 times national average earnings. So that means that for the vast majority of Kenyan workers, their entire salary will be pensionable. Okay, so the contribution will be on their entire salary. There will be the ceiling will not be relevant for the majority of Kenyans. Okay, so the next part, we now break up the 50,000 pensionable earnings. If there was no transition, the lower earnings limit is going to be broadly equal to minimum wage. So if minimum wage today, let's say, is around 15,000, that means the lower earnings limit is 15,000. So the 50,000 pensionable earnings get split into 15,000 of tier 1 earnings and 35,000 of tier 2 earnings. We then calculate 6% on each part. So tier 1 contribution is 6% of 15,000, which is 900. Tier 2 contribution is 6% of 35,000, which is 2,100. And when you add it up, hey presto, we get back to 3,000. And look at the bottom here, okay? The effective contribution rate for this employee once the transition over is 6%, because like I said, their full salary will be subject to the NSSF contributions. Now let's look at a second example, which is somebody earning a slightly higher salary of 100,000. The year 1 looks exactly the same. If you earn over 18,000 shillings, your contribution is going to be exactly the same in year 1 because the upper earnings limit is 18,000. So in this case, we contribute on 18,000. So this here looks exactly the same. And if we assume no transition, let's walk through this one. We earn 100,000 shillings. Remember, the upper earnings limit is going to be around 160,000 if there's no transition. So our pensionable earnings is the full 100. You see, even in this example, the entire salary is subject to NSSF contributions. 6% of 100,000 is 6,000. Tier 1, the lower earnings limit is 15,000. So we say the tier 1 earnings is 15,000. The remaining pensionable earnings is 85,000, right? Which is the tier 2 earnings. 6% of 15,000 is 900. 6% of 85,000 is 5,100. So when you add that up, tier 1 plus tier 2, you get back to the 6,000. Okay. In this example as well, the employee is effectively contributing 6% of their salary because the entire 100,000 is falling under the upper earnings limit. I hope this is now helping to clear things up. One last example. Let's take a high earner. So this example, the earner is earning 300,000. Guess what? Year one looks exactly the same because all three of these examples are earning above 18,000. The only time year one will look different, just to make the point even more clear, the only time year one will look different is for somebody who is earning less than 18,000 shillings. Okay, I hope that's become clear. So year one transition, exactly the same, 360, 720, 1080. Okay, if we assume there was no transition, now here's where the ceiling still applies. So this person is earning 300,000. Remember, the upper earnings limit is 160,000. And therefore, the pensionable earnings for this example is 160,000. So it's not going to be contributions on the full salary. If we take 6% of 160,000, we get 9,600. Again, we can split up the 160,000. Tier one up to the lower earning limit is 15,000. The balance of 145,000 is your tier two earnings. We can then calculate the two contributions, 6% of tier one, 6% of 15,000, which is 900. 6% of the remaining 145,000 is 8,700, and we get to 9,600. And here you can see that for a higher earner, the effective contribution rate to NSSF is not 6% because their whole salary is not subject to 6%. So if we take the amount they're contributing to NSSF and we divide it by the salary of 300,000, it's actually working out to an effective contribution rate of 3.2%. So that basically are the illustrations. I'm going to go back to my keyboard and typing out answers to the questions and hand back over to them.
Thank you very much, Adil. One of our values as Zamara is simplicity. And I hope that Adil has really demonstrated today that value by taking what appears very complex and simplifying it for you. And I hope that it is absolutely clear. But if there's any questions, I'm sure Adil will be very happy to answer them. So thanks very much, Adil. So let me turn to just the final part of our presentation, which was all of you will be thinking to yourselves as HR heads within your organizations, what are the next steps? What do you need to do? Okay, so obviously, if compliance is to happen from the month of February, one of the things that you urgently need to look at is your payroll in terms of splitting these contributions between the tier one, the tier two, and if you've got your own pension plan, to make sure you know how you are adjusting it if you have the ability to do so within the rules of your scheme. Okay, so and also if I can just mention that if you need any help in terms of a payroll, splitting the contributions and having a spreadsheet to do that, we would be very happy to help you to do that if you wish to. But let's turn to just some of the key decisions that you need to make and how you would guide your boards and the decision makers within your organizations. So in terms of compliance, a key question that you would ask yourselves is, do you have an existing retirement benefit plan? If the answer to that is yes, the likelihood and the expectation is that you would want to opt out of the second tier of contributions, of making the second tier of contributions to the NSSF. You would want to retain your own scheme and have those contributions go to your own scheme. In which case, you need to look at the design of your scheme. Does it comply with the minimum requirements? Are all your staff covered? What is the definition of earnings? And how do you integrate your scheme with the NSSF so that the impact of this act is cost neutral? And the point I want to make to you is that if you structure this properly, this can be completely cost neutral for you as an employer, for the employer. Okay. And again, this is where we can help you to structure this right. And if you wish to do that, you obviously need to put in the application, which is again quite a simple process. As you know, the Retirement Benefits Authority have issued a guideline in the newspaper last week, or I believe, it was earlier this week, where what you need to do is to submit a form called Form C1, which has certain details that they require about your scheme. You need certain resolutions and a commitment that you will update your trustee-led rules within a defined period of time. Okay, so if you have a scheme, you can choose to opt out. Now, if you don't have a scheme, you then need to say, what do you do with tier 2 contributions? And obviously one response to that would be, one option would be to say, simply send everything to the NSSF, calculate the tier 2 contributions and have those remitted to the NSSF. Okay. Another option is to opt out, in which case the options are that you set up your own retirement benefit scheme, which you can do, or you can join an umbrella retirement benefit scheme, or if your workforce is small, you can choose to participate in a personal pension plan. Okay, so it is. I hope that this decision tree shows you what the options are, because there are some immediate decisions that you would need you would need to look at your own situation and make some recommendations to your CEOs and your board so that the necessary decisions can be made. Okay, so I hope that this decision tree is reasonably clear in terms of how you would implement the act, and whether, if you have your own scheme, how you contract out. If you don't have one, the two options that you have, and if you choose to opt out, what you need to do. Okay, and again, as Zamara, we are very happy and able to help you in terms of looking at all these options, reviewing your existing arrangements for you, helping you to comply in terms of the design of your existing scheme, if you have one, or even if you participate in an umbrella fund, how you can structure it right. And if you don't have a scheme, then again, we can offer you some very cost-effective, simple and easy and good value solutions for your employees. So I want to conclude there. I want to thank you all very much for your time, for your participation. I can see there's about, yes, we've crossed that 1,000 mark now. So that's obviously shows the level of interest in this subject. I hope we've been able to do justice to it. I hope I've explained the rationale for the act. So even though people may have reservations about the act, about how it is being implemented, I hope the policy rationale has been well explained and understood. And I hope that as HR practitioners, you now understand the act. It's not necessarily a train smash, and that you have a unique opportunity to position your retirement benefits offering to your employees and actually motivate for something good for your staff. Because ultimately, as HR, you are there. You're the people who take care of the people, as I said at the outset. If you want to get in touch with us, if you want to be put on our mailing list to receive any of the updates on pensions, NSSF, please scan the QR code. And that way you can contact us. You can reach out on our email, nssfhelp@zamara.co.ke. And you can reach out to us through the IHRM as well. So once again, thank you all very much. If there are additional questions that Adil has not, with his speed of typing, has not managed to get to
them all,
then happy to answer them. So can I hand back to you, Irene? And I will stop sharing my screen as well.
Thank you, sir. You could keep the screen on for the QR code for a few more minutes.
Will do. Let me bring it up again.
For those who did not get it, thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. I am sure it's a lot more clear now. Yes, we got the 1,000 mark on Zoom and on YouTube, about 200. So the interest is there. Adil, you had the privilege of going through the questions. So maybe you could highlight the top 5 questions. What are you seeing? What are people asking? And Sandeep can respond to those. Then we can open the floor because we have about 19 minutes. So we can just take the 5 top questions depending on what you're seeing as, you know, the pain points, and we can highlight those before we open it up to the plenary.
So
Thank you.
I think there were a lot of questions on the contribution rates. So I think you can talk a little bit about tier 1 and tier 2. Some people have asked, why would anyone opt out? What are the benefits? A few people asked that. There were questions on the penalties, like did the same penalty apply to tier 2 as tier 1, which I thought was interesting. I don't recall seeing a difference in the act, so I think the penalties would be the same. People have asked about backdating to Jan 2014, which I've said there's no noise around that right now. It seems like it's from February. I think the process of opting out, there's people who either don't have a pension for all their staff, And then there's a few questions on casuals. So like housekeepers, if you have a domestic staff at home or a gardener, what if you have a casual employee who works 1 or 2 days and you pay them cash? They're not even on the payroll. At what point does fluctuating emoluments excuse you from casuals? I think casuals is a big one because there's a lot of industries where you might hire on a daily basis. Like I had somebody ask me that we have casuals and they pay them off weekly. They're not subject to PAYE because the salary is so low, right? They don't pay any deductions. It's just a cash payment. So I think that's something that probably needs clarification, but maybe you can answer.
Okay, Adil, let me attempt to answer them broadly in the order in which you asked them. So why would anybody opt out? Okay. So look, opting out is a decision for an employer. It would be an employer would review its own arrangements, its own situation, and make that decision. But what are some of the things that you would look at? If you have an existing plan, my expectation is that you would want to retain your existing scheme. So for those who have existing retirement plans, my sense would be that you would want to keep it and you would want to retain it. You would want to opt out of the NSSF. If you don't have your own scheme, what are some of the considerations that you would look at? And this is why I really like that we're speaking to HR practitioners, because you should see this as an important part of your overall benefits package. If as an employer, you're putting aside 6% of salary and your staff going to be putting aside 6% and possibly more, depending on how you motivate, because let's face it, the 6% and 6% is not going to be enough. Okay, actually, you need a higher level of contribution for a better benefit. So you could see, can we offer a better proposition by having our own retirement arrangement? How would it fit in within our own benefits policy? There is always, one could say, again, I don't want to be biased here, but there is some merit in diversifying your benefits, not having them all coming in from one basket. And finally, look, you could choose to say, are you able to offer a scheme in which you can offer better value, your staff better appreciate it because of the types of communication that you can provide to your employees, the types of information that you can give to them. So look, it's an individual decision. I think it's a no-brainer if you already have a scheme. If you don't have one, you have the choice. And again, I hope I've mentioned some of the things that you would consider in making that choice. And Adil, if you want to add, please do so in a minute. In terms of would there be do you want to comment, Adil, on this?
Well, I was just thinking out loud as you were saying that. Well, not out loud, obviously in my head, but I was thinking that, this is, as HR practitioners, this is a good time to do a more holistic review of the benefits you're providing your staff. Because if you're going to set up a scheme or you're going to join an umbrella scheme, right? As you rightly mentioned, 6% each is a good start, but it's not going to provide you with a substantial benefit that will genuinely provide you with a comfortable retirement. We know you need to be saving 20% plus really in the long term. So this might be a time to do a holistic review. You're also reviewing gratuity anyway, right? So you're kind of losing gratuity. You can gain something else, and you could do something where you try and deliver a targeted benefit or a replacement of a certain level of income. It might be a good time to do that kind of assessment.
Yeah, thanks, Adil. So, and I think it's quite important to take this opportunity to do that review for your own benefits. And Adil touched on gratuities, and this is something I wanted to mention in the presentation. Again, several employers operate end of service gratuity arrangements for their staff. Again, it's important to look at those and see how you can convert those gratuities into the contributions to the NSSF or to your own scheme, because that way you can mitigate the cost of this gratuity. And again, we can help you to think through that and how you might do that. And where there are unionized CBA agreements with your unions, again, we can help you in terms of the renegotiation of those. Okay. The penalty, so the question, if I understood it correctly, is that there is a penalty on 5% on delayed remittances to the NSSF. If you have opted out and are contributing to your own scheme, would there be a similar penalty for Tier 2? And the response to that is that the 5% penalty that is mentioned in the NSSF Act is exactly the same penalty which applies under the Retirement Benefits Act, right? So if you delay contributions to your own scheme, if you haven't, you already have a 5% penalty that applies. So it is exactly the same. It's just harmonized. Will these contributions be backdated to January 2014? I hope that nobody's going to be sinister enough to want to do that. My understanding, and I believe that all the communication that is flowing from the NSSF so far is that the contributions will be effective from now. I think there were some questions around the process of opting out. I did explain this in the presentation. So the process of opting out is that this is administered by the RBA. The process of opting out is that there is an application form called Form C1, which is on the RBA's website. It's a simple form to complete. You need to have a resolution of the employer. If it is if there is an existing scheme, you need to have a resolution of the Board of Trustees of the pension scheme as well to acknowledge receipt of the Tier 2 contributions, and that they will be treated in the same manner as in the Act. And there's certain other details that the RBA requires. You also need to commit to amending your trust deed and rules within a period of time. So it's quite a simple process. And as I mentioned, the RBA have indicated to us verbally that they will start receiving applications almost immediately and will endeavor to go through them quickly as well. If there's any further clarification that is needed on opting out, please ask. On casuals. Okay, so this is a very tricky one because, and as Adil pointed out, casuals sometimes are there just for a few days or even just for 1 or 2 days. They earn a daily payment. The previous Act required that for all casuals, there be a special contribution that was made. I don't know how many people were doing it, but the new Act requires that the Cabinet Secretary will prescribe the daily rate of contribution. My worry here is that if you have people who are just working 1 or 2 days, it's sometimes more expensive to send that money or the small amount of money or retain it just for if it is only going to be a handful of days. So I feel that further thought needs to be given to all these areas. And I'm hoping that as the Act is getting implemented, the experience will suggest, what should be done around these things. Any more, Adil, that are coming up? Or anybody wants to ask?
Yeah, I think those are about, I'm still trying to scramble to write down responses. I think people have asked if they will be given the presentation.
Yes, I believe, Irene, we can share the presentation with you, and then you could share it with whoever joined and your membership if you wish to. Irene, would that be in order?
Yes, but
okay.
Yes, it's in order. It's also available on YouTube, and someone is able to just rewatch that,
okay.
but we can make the arrangements.
Okay, all right.
Adil, do you want to take one more or we open it up? We have 10 minutes to go.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm just looking at a question right now. Will KRA be implementing changes to the taxable limit? So I think maybe you can recap on the tax position of the NSF Act and, the fact that the Income Tax Act is not quite aligned.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the presentation, there is a asymmetry between the Income Tax Act and the NSSF Act. What the NSSF Act says is that all the statutory contributions required under the Act are tax deductible. The investment income is tax exempt, and even all benefits paid under the Act are tax exempt. Okay, so this is actually a very, very generous tax treatment. Now, this conflicts with the KRA, with the Income Tax Act, because the Income Tax Act has a limit on the contribution that is tax deductible. Firstly, okay, so the current limit, as you all know, is 20,000 shillings, inclusive of contributions to the NSSF. You then have under the current Income Tax Act, when benefits are paid out, again, the benefits are taxed. Yes, there is a preferential tax treatment, but they are taxed. So I guess, look, the NSSF Act offers a more favorable treatment, and this is one that we would push for, but it's important that that position be regularized so that you don't claim the tax relief under the NSSF Act and then find that the KRA comes and whacks you with penalties for a breach of the Income Tax Act. So this is something that we've already drawn to the attention of the NSSF. Years back, we also drew it to the attention of the KRA. let's wait to see. Let's wait for the policy clarification on this.
Sandeep, this issue of casuals is still coming up.
Yeah.
So people who earn their salaries based on number of days worked. What should people do for casuals for February? I think that's a tricky one to really deal with.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
So look, I mean, the thing is that the regulations provide that the cabinet secretary will indicate the daily rate to be paid. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, and I should have actually checked. I haven't checked. So I don't believe that this has been published yet, but we will check and come back to Irene and then she can share with you. But yeah, that's a good point. We'll clarify it and come back to you. Does anybody want to ask a question?
Yes, please. You can raise your hand if you need something that has not been captured.
Rose has asked about the lower earnings limit and the upper earnings limit from year 1 up to year 5. So maybe we can just read that out from the transition provision. So
Do you want to do that, Adil?
Yeah, sure. Let me just add this. So Rose, I'll answer your question orally. So the transition provisions are contained in the 3rd schedule of the new NSSF Act. Okay, so for those of you who want to know these, the lower earnings limit, year 1, 6,000, year 2, 7,000, year 3, 8,000, year 4, 9,000. Okay, so it's going up 1,000 bob a year from 6,000 to 9,000. And from year 5 onwards, the lower earnings limit is defined as, let me just find it.
Minimum wage.
It's the average minimum wage from urban areas. It has some convoluted definition, but it's effectively minimum wage. Okay. The upper earnings limit in year 1, it's 50% of national average earnings, which is where the 18,000 comes from. In year 2, it'll be 1 times national average earnings. In year 3, it's 2 times national average earnings. In year 4, it's 3 times national average earnings. And in year 5, it's 4 times national average earnings, which is why when I showed you the illustrations, I showed you what it looks like if we ignore the transition, because I wanted to show you how the upper earnings limit is expanding. It's going from 50% of national average earnings to 4 times national average earnings. And national average earnings is what will be published by the Kenya Bureau of Standards on an annual basis. Okay.
And one of the things just to mention is that we have motivated for there to be some simplification. So, for example, instead of having those figures based on earnings, just to fix them so that everybody can plan properly, right? So hopefully there will be some refinements that will be made to the act with time.
All right. Thank
Irene,
you.
any more?
Yes, we have a number.
Okay.
We have a number of questions. So please, if I call out your name, kindly unmute and ask your question. Please limit it to 1 because we have a number and we do not have much time. So CHRP Terry, unmute and ask your question, please.
Thank you, Irene. My question was, I think it was asked in the question and answer bit, but it was not addressed to, where you, as an employer, you have different categories of employees. You have the contracts, employees who are not currently pensionable. You have employees who are already on a probation period. They are yet to be enrolled in the private pension scheme. When you are filling this form C1 or the form that we are taking to RBA, there's a number, they are asking the number of staff that you are wishing to opt out for tier 2. But then my question is, when that time comes, will we continue contributing the tier 2 for the people who are not under the private pension scheme until the time comes when they enroll? And when that time, when that time comes, will we need to maybe to fill the form again for the new number of staff that we're enrolling to our individual pension scheme? To you, Sandeep.
Terry, I'm going to ask Adel to respond to this.
Hi, Terry. Yeah, that's a nice question. So basically, you would contract out using your current scheme or pension arrangement, and those who are pensionable would then start having their tier 2 contributions remitted to that scheme. But if you have non-pensionable staff who are not covered at the same time, then they would have to continue paying tier 2 to the NSSF. at such time as they are enrolled in the pension scheme, then you would not need to apply again. They would effectively be covered under the existing application, and they would then start paying tier 2 into the private scheme. What I would add maybe is that it would be cleaner if they were made pensionable sort of at the same time as contracting out. So it's just one clean change, rather than having to split up and send some tier 2 here and some tier 2 there and then change that, just a thought.
The other thing, Terry, that's also going to be important is that for those employees who take staff on contract and pay a contract gratuity at the end, and there are quite a number who do that, like a contract gratuity of 25% after 2 years or 31% for every year worked for especially under the government and parastatals. Again, the Act will require contributions to be made for them. So there might be a need to review even those gratuities, because otherwise you will end up double paying. Okay, and I think some advice would be needed around that.
Sandeep, do you know about the filing submission to NSSF? Have they come out clearly with? There was a change in the form, right? To actually remit to NSSF. Like the way you remit, I think that's changing.
So that's all online, right? So you need to remit these contributions online, and you need to delineate the tier 1, the tier 2. Yeah. If you haven't opted out. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Okay.
All right, thank you. We can take the question from Nancy. Please unmute and ask your question. All right, Ian Kivisi. Ian Kivisi. All right, next, Daisy. Ian, we can't hear you. Okay, Daisy's hand is down. B. Awar, do you want to ask a question? Oh. All right. Sorry? All right, Sandeep, it seems then we do not have any other question because those
I had a question though. You didn't call my name.
I have a question.
I can't see your hand.
My hand was up. Jane,
okay.
your hand is up.
I have a question.
Okay, so Monica or Jane?
Okay, Monica, I'll go through with my question. My concern is around a situation probably where the employer is not so much interested or vested in the opting out, but the employees as individuals would want to contract out to an individual pension plan. Is that allowable?
Another good question, Jane. My understanding of the Act is that it is the employer decision to opt out, yes, in consultation with the employees, but it's the employer who makes that decision. So if the employer says, look, I don't want to opt out, then it will not be possible for individual employees to opt out.
Susan Campbell, if you've asked your question, please drop
your hand. I was
hand.
next after Monica. My hand is just a clarification after Monica. Can you just clarify about the transition for the upper limit, the percentages or the times from year 1 to 5?
Okay, so the upper limit, as Adil said, is there is a ceiling on the earnings on which you pay contributions. So in the first year, that ceiling is 18,000 shillings, which was deemed to be about 50% of earnings. For the second year, the ceiling was supposed to be 1 times earnings, national average earnings, increasing to 2 times, 3 times, and then 4 times. So the ultimate ceiling is 4 times national average earnings. But as Adil said, that for most of us, the likelihood is that in the next 3 to 4 years, we will be contributing at the 12% of our salary, because our salary will be within the 4 times national average earnings. I think
that's really important, because remember, by the time the transition ends in year 5, the upper earnings limit is 4 times national average earnings. So if the national average earnings represents the average worker's salary, 4 times that means, I would say at least 90% of workers will fall under that number. And therefore, the upper earnings limit will not really be relevant because it'll be 6% of your full salary. So I hope that makes some sense.
I have a question.
All right.
And that is why, sometimes when looking at the, just to add, when sometimes when looking at contracting out, a lot of employers will say, it's 700 shillings, but what they need to realize is that over time, the amount will go up. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Just a minute, please, so that we have some order. We are past 1 o'clock, which was our end time. I seek your indulgence if we can go to 1:15, so that we can complete this. And I can call out Mr. Sandeep. Is that okay with you?
Yes, should be okay.
And Irene,
right.
I'm still trying to reply to questions on the chat. So hopefully those who have written a question, I'm doing although I don't know if I'll get to all of them. There's still so many.
All right.
I'm trying to answer as many as I can. Okay.
All right. I think we can still answer and share with them later. But for those who have raised their hands, please, when we call out your name, ask your question. We will take 3 and get a response. So we have Susan Campbell, whom I had called earlier. She'll be followed by Patrick Mayo and then Aska Oko. So quickly, please unmute, ask your question. We will take the 3, then respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. I'm interested in the mechanics of the opting out, especially whether RBA, as it is currently constituted, is allowed or mandated to actually exempt employers from contributing NSSF. Thank you.
Irene, would it make sense to take all the questions together?
Yes, it will. Mayo, Patrick?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, your question?
Yeah, my question is you've explained that you need to write to RBA. So it's unless you write to RBA, that's when you opt out.
All right, thank you, Mayo. We will take your question. Mercy N. No, there was someone before Mercy. Oko, then Mercy. Oko.
Hi.
Yes, please ask your question.
I'm actually, mine was actually about the slides that our host has. Is it possible for us to get them to review them later?
We will answer that at the end. I can see my ED is here. Mercy N, please ask your question.
All right, thanks, Irene. My question is around the pensionable pay. As of now, it is 18,000. We could say that's the limit. But as the presenters have said, the amounts will increase. So the pensionable pay, will it be the gross pay or will it be the basic pay? Gross pay here, inclusive of commissions, allowances, meaning it will be fluctuating every other month.
All right, thank you, Mercy. Louisa, and then Louisa, then Valentine.
Thank you, Irene. My name is Alois Omoga. I wanted to ask around the casual employees who earn based on the days that they work. How do you implement the Tier 1 and Tier 2 on them? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go next. Thanks, Irene, as well. So my question is on opting out. I just need a clarification whether both the employer and the employee can opt out on the contributions and channel that to a pension scheme, a retirement benefits scheme. Thanks.
Thank you. If you have asked your question, please put down your hand so that we can give others an opportunity. Louisa, did you ask your question? Then we can have Martha Mathenge. Okay, Martha, yes. Then PK Minor.
I have a question. On the what are the deductions for staff earning below 18,000?
All right, thank you. PK Minor.
Okay, thanks, Irene. I think, okay, mine is on the contracting out. Now, granted that the Act takes effect immediately, obviously, clearly we'll be channeling the 2 tiers to NSSF maybe for the next 2 months or so. Now, my question is, after, if I apply for contracting out and it's granted, now in the 3rd month, now after granting, after it has been granted, and considering that most of the employers with the occupational schemes are doing much higher than the 12%. Does it mean that now the only thing that is mandatory will be the tier 1 that goes to NSSF? Then I can opt to revert back to the pre-enactment status. In other words, does it mean that we can also opt out of the tier 2 completely, and just as long as we are above the 12%? I don't know whether that is clear.
Maybe Irene, I should respond to those questions first. And Irene, will I run through them?
Yes, please, you can proceed.
Okay, so there's about 8 questions and a little bit of overlap between them. So the first one by Susan is that, is the RBI as it is currently constituted mandated to do the opting out? So Susan, under the law, the RBI has been given the mandate, the right, the obligation to handle the opting out process. The application process is with the RBI. The approval process is with the RBI. Okay, so they have been mandated to do this. So it's not with the NSSF. The application, the review of the application and the approval is done by the RBI. Okay, I hope that is clear for you. And I think Patrick Mayo, if I'm not mistaken, had a similar question in terms of the process of opting out. And I'd explained this in the course of the presentation, that there is a form that needs to be completed. There are resolutions that would need to be entered into by the employer, and if you have a scheme, the trustees of the scheme. And you would need to commit to amend your trustee and rules, or confirm that if it's an umbrella fund, that the umbrella fund that you're participating in has got a contracting out certificate. Okay. The application needs to, under the Act, the application needs to be submitted 8 weeks before the intention to opt out, i.e. 2 months before the intention to opt out. And the RBI has 30 days within which to respond. But in the consultations that we've had with the regulator, they've indicated that they would be willing to start receiving applications and would endeavor to review them much faster, and so that they can grant those approvals much faster as well. So we are hoping that that can be done. Okay. Oko asked for the slides, and I believe that those will be made available, and the director will explain how. Mercy asked an important question again about pensionable pay. Is it gross or is it basic? So as I mentioned, the intention under the Act, or if you look at the Act, it says that pensionable earnings are effectively the gross earnings, excluding fluctuating emoluments. Okay, so emoluments that are fluctuating, such as commissions, bonuses, would not form part of pensionable earnings, but things like housing allowance, because that's a regular amount, that would form part of pensionable earnings. Okay, so however, as I also mentioned, it appears that there is a drafting error in the regulations made under the Act, which seem to suggest that you could go by basic salary for now until the matter is clarified. Okay, so Mercy, I hope that answers your question. Then we have Louisa on casual employees. How do you split the tier 1, the tier 2? As I mentioned earlier, that for casual employees, what I believe is going to happen is that the Cabinet Secretary will indicate the daily amount, and the contributions will need to be paid on that daily amount that the Cabinet Secretary has prescribed. But I don't recall seeing it, but this is something we need to check on. Valentine's question about opting out, that is it one or the other? Is it the employer or the employee opts out, or is it both? It can only be both. So the decision to opt out is a decision of the employer. And when the employer opts out, it is both the employer and the employee who opt out of making tier 2 contributions to NSSF. To Martha's question, what happens when somebody is earning less than 18,000 in the first year? Then they will pay 6% of the, say it is 15,000 or 10,000, they will pay 6% of the 10,000 as a total contribution by the employee and 6% of 10,000 by the employer. Okay, so I hope that is clear. So it's not fixed so it's not that if you're earning 10,000, you would still pay the 1,080. No, it will be lower than that. The final question by PK Maina is, if I contract out as an employer, my scheme is a superior scheme, do I still need to retain the tier 2 contributions? Do I need to treat them separately? Yes, it is very important because the Act provides that you need to record those tier 2 contributions in your own pension scheme separately. You need to designate them as tier 2 contributions. And when the benefits are paid for tier 2 contributions, they have to be paid in accordance with the NSSF Act, i.e. they cannot be paid as a lump sum. They have to be paid as a regular pension. Okay, I think the one question has not been asked is that if you contract out, and let us say you apply to contract out, but the approval is taking longer, so it means that for a month or two, you make those tier 2 contributions to NSSF. The Act says that once you receive your contracting out certificate, you can ask for those tier 2 contributions to be transferred back to you, to your scheme, and the NSSF needs to do that within 30 days. Irene, I believe those were the questions that were asked.
Yes,
I think we've only got a couple more minutes now. Right.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but someone has just written on the chat that there is an association that has gone to court. Should we wait before we file the returns? Sandeep had mentioned that. Maybe he will still recap. And another one, someone says, what happens to those who have closed payroll for February? What do they do? We still have a number of hands, but the team from Zamara had indicated that they will share a guide with some FAQs. So please allow us to end it at that. Sandeep can answer those 2 questions, and then we allow our ED to make a remark, and we can bring this to a close. Kindly.
So Irene, on the first one, yes, as I mentioned, we understand that there has been a notice of appeal to the Supreme Court by one of the associations that was a litigant in this matter. We do not know, as we know now, there has been no stay that has been given by the Supreme Court, and therefore, I'm not a lawyer, but the legal position would be that the Act is effective until such time, if and until such time there is a contrary order issued. Okay. The second question in terms of what if we have already processed our payroll? Look, I fundamentally believe that there will be a lot of teething issues here, and I'm hoping that the NSSF, the RBA, the policymakers, we'll see that, there's good faith here by employers, by everybody, by people wanting to comply. And that, look, you can have a situation where, yes, your payroll closed. And my sense would be that if that communication is made to the NSSF and perhaps the regulator, then it ought to be okay. And maybe they might ask that you deduct it the following month. But I'm hoping that there will be goodwill and that we are not going to see a draconian approach to enforcement of this Act. That the NSSF and the RBA will appreciate that, look, people are trying to comply, and sometimes, there's people are learning as we go. And yes, if a payroll has been processed, there's not much that can be done for this month, right? Unless you want to make the supplementary payment. So one of the things that we are really pleading with the policymakers for in all the engagements that we have with them is that, look, there needs to be a level of understanding that, look, this has just come in. People are getting to grips with it, getting to understand it. Complying with it means, issues around payroll processing, even payroll systems might need to be changed. There could be tax issues that need to be dealt with. Employees who want to contract out, employees with existing schemes, they need to, there's quite a bit that needs to be done. So we are hoping there will be goodwill on the NSSF and RBA side, and the government, of course.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time. We do not take it for granted, and for going through the questions, and Adil for typing away. I think we got to over 100, and you have responded to 120 questions, and we have 51 more to go. So thank you so much for that. We will come back to you, members, with responses to some of these questions. At this point, allow me to invite the ED to make a brief remark and say kwaheri as we bring this to a close. Asante.
Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you so much, Mr. Sandeep and Adil, for leading this session. As members of the institution, we really appreciate your contribution to this. I hope everyone can hear me. And to the members, the 1,000 plus the 300 following us on YouTube, thank you for taking the time. It's important to note that this was a sensitization exercise. The take home for everyone who is managing payroll is that to now go and draft that paper for your management, the costs, implications, the administrative implications this will have, and advise your different organizations. We may not have answered everything here, but I am glad that Zamara will come up with something for us to follow. But again, sit down from everything that you've picked from here, even if you need to replay the YouTube. I know many members are asking, can we have the slides? The question is no. If you want to revisit this information, please go to the YouTube. And the reason why I will tell you that this is an intellectual property. We've had situations whereby before people copy-pasted other people's presentations, and we do not want to have that risk. This will be available as a link on our YouTube. Please follow. If you need further help, you can pick it from here with Samara. They actually set up a help desk through the email presented here. As when I give back to them, as they say their final words, they will share with you if they've not done so yet. But mine is to appreciate everyone, and let's do this for the welfare of our employees. As HR professionals, we have a very tough job to balance between what is the need of the employer and what is the need of the employee. To many of you, when you do those statistics, this may not be that expensive for you, especially if you already have gratuity and if you have pension. So you need to be informing your employers from a point of information on how they want to move forward with this. Asanteni sana, and thank you, Irene. Over to you, and to all the members. Please visit.
Thank you, Edie. I was being very careful not to overcommit to sharing the slides.
Irene, you're muted.
Can you hear me? Oh, I'm hanging.
You're back.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yes, you're back.
Members how they can get in touch with Zamara.
We can't hear you.
Irene or Sandeep?
I'm on mute. Do you want me to? Hi, Director. Did you want me to say anything or?
Hello? So, we were saying you say kwaheri. Sorry, I think the internet is like you're done. You could say kwaheri.
Okay. So Irene, if I hear you right, you want me to just say a closing word. So I just want to say thank you once again to IHRM for giving us this opportunity to present. I hope that we have done justice to you, that this session has been useful, that we have helped to demystify the Act, explained its rationale. And importantly, I hope that as HR practitioners, that you will be able to take this up with your respective organizations and actually create something good out of this, because that, I mean, as I said, the Act is a good and a noble objective. There's a unique opportunity for you as HR practitioners to position your benefits package, review and position your benefits package much better. And I hope that you will take the opportunity to do so. And yes, Zamara, we're very happy, willing, able to help you as you do this. We'd love to be your partners. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. I see Irene has dropped out, so we will end this webinar now. Asanteni sana and have a great weekend ahead. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.